Okay, we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us at Coalesce, day one. Super excited. My name's Ernesto. I'm a solutions architect. I work for DBT Labs, and I'm based in Ireland. I'm the host of this session. We have a kind of live experience coming up on Thursday in London, so I'll be flying over to that. And, I know some of you are in New Orleans, the uh, where Nick is. The title of the session is "Data Teams Kill Your Service Desk." On Slack, it looks like there's a lot of heavy metal themes going here. The morbid title of the thing kind of evoked a bit of metal in people. You'll be joined here shortly by Nick. Nick is the founder of Workstream.io. I am actually super excited about this talk. I have worked in data for many years, I ask a lot of teams like how they track requests. I don't think I've really gotten an answer, but also I used to work for Looker and I used to work for another tool called Jaspersoft, and they ask, how do I collaborate on the assets that we make? And so like I'm super excited to hear what you have to say. But anyway, not only does he have this great startup in the data space, he's also a proud dad of three kids: Ari, 5-year-old, Liam, good Irish name, 3-year-old, and Isabella, 6 weeks here. So Nick, I don't know if you're in New Orleans to just escape the madness that your house must be right now, but anyway, all the chat conversation is going to be taking place on Slack. So Coalesce Data Teams Kill is the name of the channel. If you're not part of the chat, you still have time to join. So getdbt.com/security, and then once you're in, just search for the channel Coalesce Data Teams Kill. So talk with other attendees there. We after the session, we're gonna like do all the Q&A and things like that in Slack. We'll take a few questions kind of live towards the end. So yeah, it's over to you, Nick, to take us away.
Awesome. Ernesto, thanks so much for having me. And thanks everyone for joining this session. I hope you will find it fun and engaging. I'll dive into it, right? So I'm Nick. I'm the founder and CEO of Workstream.io, and I'm going to talk to you about your service desk and how to kill your service desk, which apparently folks think is super metal, which I love. And Ernesto kind of queued this off by talking about the madness in my home. So let's talk about the madness of the service desk experience. So first off, why am I giving this talk? I started my career 15 years ago as an analyst at Tesla. And then much more recently, I ran operations at a SaaS company based in New York, where I now live with my family. And so I really have seen a lot of these pain points, really workflow pain points between analysts and others throughout the organization, from really both sides of the coin. And I'm really just obsessed now with these relationships, right, between the business and data people and business people. And so I think a lot about this, and I talk to lots of data teams kind of about this surface area of their workflow. And when I think about the service desk and how to characterize it, to me, I think of the ninth circle of hell in Dante's Inferno. And I found this awesome definition from Merriam-Webster that about treachery, which is the ninth circle of hell, and it's a violation of allegiance or of faith and confidence. So it's really all about betraying others, right? And so an example resident of the ninth circle of hell was Cain, who obviously betrayed his brother. And I think this just so many ways encapsulates our feelings about the service desk. It's all about, I think, like eroding trust between other folks that you work with, which is kind of a tragedy when you think about it, because ultimately you're trying to work with others and collaborate with others. And, you know, I use the term service desk really, really loosely. And I've talked with lots of teams about what are the strategies they employ to effectively manage, quote unquote, the requests of others, right? And there's a lot of different ways people do this. I think it generally boils down to a couple of different main form factors. The first is some type of Slack channel, either a single Slack channel for your entire organization or functionally focused Slack channels. So one of our customers actually has a Slack channel called Data Sucks, and it's actually a joke, an internal joke between the data team and the customer success team. And they actually have a really, really great relationship, but it kind of speaks to their feelings about that specific interaction. So that's one way teams oftentimes do this. And then the other polar end of the spectrum is implementing an actual ticketing solution like JIRA Service Desk, or maybe just even using something like Google Forms, which lots of teams do as well. Ultimately, though, I think regardless of what your like preferred strategy is, you end up probably in some type of terrible combination where you're getting requests from all over the place and it becomes this kind of awful mess, right? And so when I think about our feelings about the service desk, right, there's lots of different ways that people do this. What is it that we hate? And I don't think it's the form factor that we actually hate. I think it's rooted in something really much deeper. And I think if you meditate on all of your quote unquote service experiences throughout your entire life, generally, I think people have had bad service experiences. And there, of course, there are a few notable exceptions to this. Zappos is an amazing example of just like unbelievable customer service or experience. But generally you think of like, hey, I'm on the phone with Delta and they can't change my flight, and or I'm screaming at I'm being screamed at by like a hotel concierge for whatever reason. So like we have all of these like pent up experiences around quote unquote service or service desk, completely tangential to like our day to day. And so what we think about when we implement the service desk is those experiences. And really what that does is it signals behavior, like how should we act? How should others act? And it triggers our emotions. And so if you think about the ticketing system, JIRA Service Desk as an example, in many ways, that is really like the best experience that we have come up with. It's far better than, for example, a boiler room call center or like an email that you send to IT to come and like help fix your laptop, as an example. So to me, it's less about the form factor. It's more about where have we come with service experiences, and what does that signal for how we should work and how we should act. So that's one reason I think we hate our service desk. I think another big underlying reason people have these emotions is because in many ways, the form factor that we choose reflects like deep power dynamics within your organization. So if you think about your service desk strategy, your decisions boil down to, I think, a couple of dimensions. First off, do you want to work synchronously or asynchronously with others in the organization? So that's one dimension. And I would say a second dimension would be how collaborative versus transactional do you want to be? And where you sit on these dimensions is going to inform what you do. So one extreme, again, is the Slack channel, which generally optimizes for synchronous work and being uber collaborative. And so those are some of the pros of a model like this. It's collaborative, it's fast. You're sitting there like you're monitoring Slack, people ask you questions, you answer it. And it's human, right? Like you are interacting one-to-one with other folks within your organization. So in that way, it's really great. But, and there's always a but, it's super chatty, so that people are constantly pinging you and like, how do I actually get anything done? The knowledge that gets created there is very untraceable. And so like, how do you go back and understand what questions were asked and what the answers were? And it just also sets up lots of unreasonable expectations on like response time, right? Like, do I have to respond to these people within 60 seconds every time somebody asks me a question? Like, that's really, really hard standard to live up to. The polar opposite, again, would be something like JIRA, which is optimizing for asynchronous work, but it is very transactional, right? So the pros of something like this is it more easily fits into any Agile, methodology that your team might already be using. Again, it helps manage expectations on response time, and it really frees up your team for deep work. But it runs the risk of feeling very impersonal. It's really weird to be like interacting with other folks in your org using tickets. Like, I don't know, it just feels very, very odd to teams. And it sacrifices like the speed of answers for like your own personal deep work time, right? And so it can feel a little bit black boxy. Like, I made this request as like someone else in the organization. Like, where did that thing go, and is it ever going to get picked up? I don't think there's a right answer there. The answer of what you decide to do in many ways is like a question of who should wield the power. Should it be other folks throughout the organization, or should it be your team? And kind of where you fit on that spectrum could inform what you're going to do. But like, what a terrible like decision you have to make, right? Like, who should wield the power, and that should inform my service desk strategy. Like, that's another like underlying reason I think that we hate the service desk. We have all of these like pent up service experiences, and so that signals our behavior. And then we were like forced to make this decision, which is like a hard trade-off. So that's like not a great feeling. And then I would also say that I think the service desk, in many ways, specifically for data teams, reminds us of our mutual failures. And so what do I mean by that? I'm not the first person to bring up how should a data team work, right? Should a data team be run as a product team? Is it an engineering function? Obviously, we're at the Analytics Engineering Conference. Is it a service team? And I think most folks in the community would argue it's definitely not a service team. But what is a data team, and how should you run it? And you could call this a cop-out, but my take is, and one of the reasons that data work is so hard, is it's actually all of this, right? It's the same team doing all of this work, often the same person doing all of this work, right? So you're researching and scoping out your data product. You're planning and executing the build effort and development effort itself. You're triaging bugs, and you're managing the expectations of this like large, complex set of other people. This is really, really hard. And like, how do you balance the product work and support work? I would definitely recommend you go read all these articles. I'm not going to regurgitate them. But how do you resolve these conflicts? And I think in many ways, no one has a great answer to this. And some of our frustrations end up being exhibited as hate towards the service desk, which is fair. So we implement this service desk to help manage kind of this service workflow, right? But we also have other tools and methodologies that we use. And I would also posit that frustration I was just talking about is in many ways also Agile's fault. And it's the fault of Agile project management methodology. And there's this great quote from Winston Churchill about democracy. That it's the worst form of government except for all the others that we have tried. And I think that's just a great way to refer to Agile and data work. And I'm very curious if folks would agree or disagree with that. So drop it in Slack, please. But the normal case against why Agile is not the perfect fit for data work is, data work is much more iterative. There's no predefined start and end to the work. And I'm sure there's lots of other normal arguments for why Agile is the perfect fit. My corollary to this would be that data work is also much more interconnected with others throughout the organization. It's much more collaborative, and it's much less modular than software engineering or traditional development workflows, and in some of the ways that we've been talking about. And so I think we don't express it, but I think in some ways, Agile is also at fault in the same way that the service desk is at fault. And I think those faults are based upon their commonalities. So what does Agile and what do service desks have in common? Well, first off, I would say that I think both of those systems are in many ways designed for a kind of a previous age and a previous type of work, right? So I would say that both Agile and Service Desk are designed for what I call and what others call complicated systems. So complicated systems are linear, they're predictable, and they're measurable, right? And the advent of all of this, of course, was like the assembly line, and there's been many iterations of that kind of concept. But how does a complicated system work? It generally transforms known inputs, like a ticket, into an output, be it features of your data product or answers that folks within your organization have requested. The complicated systems are generally the steps of them are dependent. So like step B is dependent on step A. To put the wheel on the car, the wheel has to be built, right? But there's not a lot of context required around previous or like the next step. So like the person who's putting the wheel on the car doesn't necessarily need to know how the wheel is put together. They just need to know all I got to do is put the wheel on the car, right? And so I would generally argue that both Agile and Service Desk were designed to address complicated systems. But I don't think that's the world that we live in. I think that data teams and generally the world today is a complex world, and it's vastly different than what came before. And so what is a complex system or a complex world? And all of this about complex versus complicated systems, I did not invent this. This is all heavily influenced by the thought leadership of General Stanley McChrystal. And he has an amazing book about all of this called Team of Teams, which if you're like a management wonk like me, I recommend that you read. But he describes complex systems as those where it's impossible to tell which events might lead to which types of results. And he was talking about the fight against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So very, very different than data. But in general, a complex system is characterized by its multidimensional nature. So inputs can come from any direction and outputs can flow in any direction, right? And so that's a fundamental difference. And then also process steps are generally independent. So you can perform a step in like one area of your like data product or in one area of your workflow, and it's not relying upon other steps, but that step that you take could impact other steps or other things that are happening within your environment. And so it's a vastly different world than just something that an assembly line can address. So the question then becomes, how do you navigate a complex system? And while people were joking that this is a super like metal presentation, kill your service desk, kind of the answers to this actually become like pretty touchy-feely. So please indulge me. But how do you navigate complex systems? So there are basically two things that you need to do. And there's a lot that goes into them, but the first is creating shared consciousness. And so what is shared consciousness? I'll address that in a second. And then how do you empower people to execute independently? And if you believe that these are the answers to how you navigate a complex system, these are also the answers to how you kill your service desk. You need to create shared consciousness in your organization, shared consciousness of each other, and also shared consciousness of your data. So shared consciousness generally is adequate understanding and compassion for other folks and their knowledge. And you can apply that to data as well. And then independent execution is what it sounds like. Folks can execute independently with all of their knowledge, with their shared consciousness, and they don't have to ask for permission. And if you can get to both of these things within your team and within your organization, you're well on your way to killing your service desk, not necessarily fully ripping out your Agile project management tool or other tools that you have, but to changing the culture of your organization. So great, Nick. Like, You came to me with this like super touchy-feely recommendation, like, now what? Like, how do I actually go ahead and create shared consciousness about data within my organization? And I think part of the challenge here is that a lot of these problems are super cultural. A lot of this is aspirational. And some of this stuff is also organization wide and goes all the way up to like your leadership team. But it also is an amazing opportunity for your data team, I think, to really live its role as not only like the nerve center of an organization, which I truly believe, but also as like one of the most strategic teams in your entire organization. So here's some ideas from me about how to create shared consciousness about your data. And please like drop into the Slack. How do you create shared consciousness about your data? I'm really, really curious to hear how folks might do this. So a couple of tips before I wrap. So the first would be to provide knowledge about your data wherever and whenever people need it. And so there's lots of ways that you could do that. A couple of things that I've seen done successfully. Think about some type of data all hands meeting. So maybe that's like the entire company or with like in a specific function where you talk about, your data product, what's being built. You can do demos, stuff like that. But how do you speak to everyone in the organization about what's happening, what's being seen in the data, and kind of start that process of creating shared consciousness. So I would think about doing this like wall to wall within the org. And then I would also look at specific opportunities to have people, what I would call, quote unquote, face the data. What I mean is have everyone like looking at the data together, sitting around a table, looking at the data and having a conversation about it, right? That's in many ways creating shared consciousness and setting the stage for independent execution. So what could that look like? I mean, that could look as basic as this functional area sits down and looks at the data, and much more importantly, is having an active conversation about the data on a weekly basis, whatever that cadence looks like. And that's not going to be a one size fits all thing. That's probably going to be different function to function. Second tip would be think about how you can impart the understanding of one user of your data to another user of the data. You can use systems and tools to do this, but a couple of ideas would be think about cross-training. You think about customer support teams. I don't know if you've ever done this in your org, but some of the best teams and companies I've ever worked with, they have everyone, especially like software engineers, cross-train as a customer support person so that they can like personally feel like what customers are going through and what they love about the product, their issues with the product. So can you cross-train other folks in some way, shape, or form to be part of your data team for a week? Like, can they experience that? And vice versa. Can you cross-train your people to do the work of others, right, that you work with? So I think there's something really, really interesting there. And I would also then say, just think a lot about tiger teams, which is just a buzzword for a cross-functional team that attacks a specific problem area or a specific project. And just make sure that data has a seat at the table there, right? And that's, I think, what I've seen, the highest impact opportunities for data people to not only get visibility, but to create shared consciousness and appreciation for the value of the data and the value that they bring. Another tip would be to think about how you can orient your users to your data and to validate its source. And I would say this is regardless of where people consume data. And this starts to morph into other theses I have about how data is consumed within an organization. But generally, I think data is consumed all over the place within an organization. And so how do you orient the user at that point of consumption through things like documentation or training content, like document, because then people can self-service a lot of the answers, right? And also, are there ways that you can expose underlying information about your data lineage, data quality to those end users as well? There's a lot that goes into data observability and data quality efforts But are you communicating that to the front line, right? So there's some ways that you can use DBT exposures actually to kind of do this. And so I highly recommend you check out DBT exposures, and shameless plug, our product does something that helps you not only with expose documentation, but also expose data lineage and quality at the point of data consumption. But there's some really cool stuff out of the box that DBT offers there as well. And then I would say the last tip would be think about how you can treat every piece of data like a product or a feature of your product that people need to be onboarded onto, right? And so especially in a high growth environment or an environment where there's lots of new folks joining all the time, you should be training each one of those new hires in your data product and what they have available to them. Because if they don't know what's available to them and how to use it, they're definitely not, you're not imbuing them with shared consciousness, and you're just going to set yourself up for a lot of questions over time. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing would be invest in regular training and demos for everyone within the org as your data efforts and your data product evolves. And so figure out what that cadence is and invest in it. And I'll kind of wrap there. What I would say is you kind of want to, when I think about all of this and the risk of this is you're like, well, Nick, is this just like more work for us? And I think the answer is no, it's not actually more work. I think it's a shift in how you think about the work. And in many ways, it's about, hey, how do we get proactive and get ahead of some of the reactivity that's going to come in? And so there's cultural work that needs to be done here. And then there's actual like physical work as well. So I generally think I'm on time, but that's my presentation. Thank you so much for listening to me and joining. I will be hanging out in Slack to answer any questions, and you can hit me up whenever in DBT Slack if you want to talk more, or here's my email as well. So I think that's it. Ernesto, I don't know if there are questions or things that we want to dig into now, but
yeah, there's actually been a lot of discussion in Slack, which is great. I'm going to read out a few questions. One comes from Tai Pam, and does promoting data stewardship help scale the service desk? So errors can get triaged by SMEs, feature requesters, do the legwork with data stewards before submitting tickets. And I'm hearing a lot about data mesh this year here. So it's almost like this idea that we can kind of like decentralize the data team and embed them. Like how do you view that when it comes to service desks?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and full disclosure, I'm not going to pretend to be a expert on data mesh, so I'll do my best to answer this one. But I think that question in many ways goes to like organizational model, right? And should you have like a centralized function, or should you have a distributed function, and should there be some type of like matrix there? And I'm generally a fan of like the matrix if you can do it well, because you kind of get like the best of both worlds. But I think the risk to that to an extent is the like requests of others like increase, right? Because the more and more on the front lines folks on your data team are, the more opportunity there is for people to ask you questions. And so, I mean, that's maybe the negative. I think the positive is that are you adding more value to the org? Like, I don't know, I'm just talking, right? Like, is it actually a measure of success that you have more questions, or is it a measure of success that you have fewer questions, right? Like, are more conversations about your data, that's generally a good thing. I think the risk is like the overhead or maintenance associated with it. But I think you want to have more conversations about your data. I think you just want to, you want everyone in the org to be able to be an active participant in that data and not be looking at you constantly, right? And so I think that goes again to the idea of shared consciousness. So anyways, I'll pause there because now I'm just talking, but
Yeah, no, it's definitely not one you can get a yes or a no kind of in 2 seconds. And actually all of the questions, because I think the depth of your talk is pretty, uh, it's spicy for sure. So let's see. Kathy asked, any thoughts on how to approach share consciousness while facing regulatory compliance issues, stipulating limited access to at least some parts of your data? So it sounds like in Kathy's org, there's kind of like a gatekeeper function because of the regulated um, function of it, which puts her in an interesting spot.
So yeah, it's definitely an interesting and difficult spot to be in, right? I mean, I guess my initial reaction to that would be if there's like regulatory and compliance reasons that like information can't be shared across like a fire, like effectively an internal firewall, right? Um, I would my initial reaction would be, well, think about like that space where you can talk about some portion of your data, right? And invest in shared consciousness in that area, right? And then, okay, we've got like three places that are like three areas in our org that are like firewalled, and there's not lots of like communication that can happen across them. But like, what are the pieces of information that can be shared? Can you anonymize like information, or can you anonymize data, be it like pulling out PIA or whatever it is? And so I would think of in each one of these areas, how do we invest in this? And then more broadly, are there still ways that we can openly share information despite some of our limitations?
Thanks, Nick. So we have to wrap up for the next sessions, which is efficient is the new sexy, a minimalist approach to growth, and move fast and don't break things, testing DBT models with Big I. So Nick, the Slack channel has gone absolutely wild with very good questions. So if you have time to get in there and chat away, that'd be awesome. But
Yeah,
thanks
yeah, I'll
so much
hop
for
over to
joining us.
Slack now. So
Thanks for your chat. Bye.
thank you.